Good afternoon. My name is Shiv Malik. I'm the moderator for this event. This is the fourth talk today of our 15 by 15 talks, and hopefully the title's somewhat self-explanatory. It's 15 minutes of talking, and today we have Susan Greenfield. Right now we have talking about mind change, how screen technology is changing the way we think and feel. So she'll be talking for 15 minutes, and then afterwards we'll go for 15 minutes to questions to the audience. So please have them at the ready. There'll be roving mics along the sides, and I'll sort of point you out. You can get those questions moving. And then there's another way to participate, which is you're probably sitting on it. It's the card. And on that card, it tells you how to participate with social media, either through Twitter, or there's an app called Resembly, which you can also use, which will deliver comments up at the top. The hashtag is OECD4. We're in room 4, OECD 4. So our speaker for the next 15 minutes is Susan Greenfield. She is a research scientist and author. She also has an incredibly impressive biography. She currently holds a senior research fellowship at Oxford University and is the founder and CEO of a biotech company that is developing a novel anti-Alzheimer drug. She's been awarded 32 honorary degrees from British and foreign universities. That's a lot of honorary degrees.
It's like buses, they come along.
Right, yeah, no, we've actually got actual degrees and then the honorary ones. I don't know how people, so we'll have to figure that out later. You could tell me what you do with those. And if that wasn't enough, she's also a baroness and a holder of the Légion d'honneur, which I think maybe puts you in a club of like 2 or 1. No, she doesn't know. It's just her in the club. Okay, so we'll get on with this. Could you give a big round of applause to Susan Greenfield?
Shiv, thank you very much, and it's great to be here back in Paris, where I used to work at the Collège de France when dinosaurs were roaming the earth. What we're going to do, because I've only got 15 minutes, is go straight in and explore a question that I think is important to everyone, not just neuroscientists, but anyone, not just even parents, anyone who's a citizen of the 21st century, basically, and who is concerned about how we can make the best of this astonishing new environment that's changing so fast. Without sounding too old-fashioned, it would be fantastic if you don't tweet or the rest of it until the end, because what I would love is if you actually think and reflect on what we're talking about rather than giving instant knee-jerk reactions. I know nowadays that's a tough call, and it's up to you. But on the other hand, at the end, I gather you can employ all this social media, and it's a sign of the modern world that that's what one wants to do all the time, is give instant feedback. But perhaps I'd like to convince you that's not necessarily the best way to go. Right, so let's start then with what I've called mind change. As you can see, it's very similar, I suggest, to climate change. And I love this picture of the physical brain here, because it reminds me of when I first dissected a brain at university. And I remember thinking, as I held the brain in my hand, perhaps there are those here who've had similar experience, if you're a neurologist. Yeah. I remember thinking, if I got a bit under my fingernail, would that be the bit that somebody loved with? Or would it be a memory? Or would it be an emotion? Can you have love under your fingernail? Yeah. Or could you have a habit like biting your fingernail under your fingernail? Sorry to do this to you straight after lunch, but it's an amazing thought. Now, the reason there's this rather clunky analogy is because what I want to suggest to you is that we are in a position comparable in many ways to climate change, where it's in our hands to do something. It's in our hands to do something. Both are global. The order got out here a bit. Both are controversial. Both are unprecedented. And something that's less obvious, I'd like to suggest to you that both are multifaceted. Now, I know very little about climate change, but I do know there's lots of questions in areas that one can attack. What I'd like to just explore with you with mind change is that it's not just a simplistic question, are computers good or bad, but more, given it's a whole lifestyle, to break down the various aspects. And what we're going to look at is video games, social networking, and search engines, all in themselves posing different challenges and opportunities. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look first at why it's important, because we tend to think of ourselves as creatures that are completely fixed, that we are, as some school kids said to me once, oh, no one's going to tell me what to do in my brain, and drugs aren't going to affect my brain. One tends to think of oneself as a complete and inviolate entity. but actually it's far from the truth. So, when you started life, we'll call this, if you like, the development of a mind. You started life with pretty much all the brain cells that you needed, and these are the connections, the stringy bits are the connections between the brain cells. Now, it's what's going to happen next that makes you different from, say, a goldfish. I don't want to be too rude to goldfish, but let's be brutal. They don't have great personalities, do they? Yeah. And if your kids had a goldfish and it died, you could go and get another one. They wouldn't know any difference. And you couldn't do that with pet cats or dogs even, and you certainly couldn't do it, even if they might want you to, with their brothers or sisters. And that's because as we become more complex in evolutionary terms, so something amazing happens. You get more and more opportunity to be an individual, to be more diverse in your behavioral repertoire. And the superlative example of that is indeed the human mind and the human brain, where even if you're a clone, that's to say an identical twin, you are going to be unique. And no one has been like you for the 100,000 years we've stalked this planet, nor will they ever again. So where does this individuality lie, and why is it so important? And if it's not in the genes, because one can look at identical twins and they're still different, then how does it evolve? And that's what we're going to look at here. So here you see at 3 months what's happened, and even within the first 2 years of life, the growth of the brain postnatally is accounted for not by the proliferation of the blobby bits, the brain cells, but by the connections between them. Now, what's very exciting about this is these connections are highly dynamic. They can be upgraded and strengthened and weakened and changed every single moment that you are alive, driven by your individual experiences. And guess what? If you have individual experiences, you become an individual. This is something called plasticity. It doesn't mean to say the brain is made of plastic. It comes from the Greek plastikos, to be molded. So let's have a look at what happens then when your connections are changed. So as you're interacting with things, so the connections will adapt to those particular experiences. Literally, those experiences will leave a mark on your brain. And what I want to suggest is that the reason for that and the benefit of that, sadly not granted to the goldfish, is that you'll be able to understand things and have a personalized meaning of things as time unfolds. So let's take 2 examples. The first would be this. Now, when a baby is first born, or an infant, and you show them this gold shiny thing, they might be very pleased with that. It's something they can put in their mouth, they could roll it, it's smooth, it's shiny. Because of its physical properties, it's quite appealing. But as the weeks turn to months, turn to years, as the child interacts or has experiences involving this object, they will learn, they will see, they will experience that it's something that goes on fingers. So they know it's something that goes on fingers, not just to play with. And then they'll further refine their experience that a gold shiny thing only goes on one finger under certain circumstances. So they will learn as they get older, if they see someone with one of these, it will mean something. It will say something about the person that is not apparent from the intrinsic sensory properties alone. And then, as they get older, they might acquire one of their own. And that specific gold shiny thing, even though generically it's similar to other gold shiny things, that might be the most special thing to them. It might mean more than anything else, might be more significant than anything else because of all the associations and connections that it triggers. Then, sadly, as often happens, you could go from the honeymoon to the divorce, and now it's the most bitter thing. It's the most complex associations that it triggers. All triggered by this gold shiny thing that a baby would put in its mouth. So what's changed? Not the gold shiny thing. It's the connections up here that have changed. So connections help you personalize the world around you. They help you give the world a meaning, a significance, other than just taking the world at face value. And the more you go through life, the more personalized and significant various things become. Connections also have another advantage. Now, this is a ghost, in case you haven't seen one recently. It's an English ghost. I'm sure French ghosts are very similar. But anyway, this is a ghost. Had I come on dressed like this, I doubt if anyone here would have been very free. You might have thought the English are a bit weird, but you probably think that anyway. But certainly, you wouldn't have been frightened. However, a 2-year-old child would have been frightened because they do not have the connections, the associations that enable them to understand that you don't have to take this at face value, that it's not something that is life-threatening, this is somebody who's wearing a silly costume and being silly. Similarly, someone with dementia also could well be very frightened. And that's because in dementia, and I'm going to talk about that later in the panel this afternoon, so I won't go into it too much now, but just as these connections are slowly grown and curated and bespoke and tailored to you, ever-changing as you go through life, sadly, with dementia, with Alzheimer's disease, which is a disease, albeit of older people, but it's not a consequence of aging, but if you get this disease, what happens is the connections are slowly dismantled. So you go back in time, you retrace the footsteps. So if anyone here, and I'm sure there's so many people, someone at least must have had their lives touched by this terrible disease, what happens is the world means less and less to the patient. They understand less and less. It has less and less significance. And so eventually even someone that used to mean a lot to you, like your partner, your spouse, is not recognized. Because now the child and the Alzheimer patient, the very small child, will be taking the world purely on sensory input. They have nothing else to go on. They don't have the checks and balances that is the blessing of the rest of us. So a mind then gives you deeper meaning over time. It enables you to understand beyond face value what is really going on. And the fact that these are modified and upgraded every single moment you're alive shows how powerful your evolving mind is. So it's not as if they are fixed, but you're a different person from the person you were a month ago, a week ago, even, dare I say it, a few minutes ago, because these are constantly changing. So you can see how the environment is really important. I'd like to suggest to you that the mind, people often quibble about what is the definition between a mind and a brain. The mind is not some airy-fairy alternative to the squalor of the physical brain. No, it is the personalization of the brain through these unique dynamic configurations that are driven in turn by your unique experiences. So if that's the case, then in the future, will it be that if you're in a world where it's images and sensation primarily through hearing and seeing, that you're going to see the world differently? If you don't have time to reflect, join up dots, are you going to perhaps have a different mindset, one more childlike than otherwise? Let's take, for example, video games, where one could be more reckless because actions don't have consequences. We know that with video games, there's a surge in a chemical called dopamine, which in turn inhibits an area at the front of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which when inhibited leads to excessive recklessness and risk-taking. More of that anon. Short attention span. If you are absolutely fixated on fast-moving, flashing images, how are you going to have the kind of protracted attention that up until now people have had when they've read books? Adversarial. People often talk about the problems of violent computer games, and it's not as if it makes you go out and shoot someone, but rather that the brain adapts always. And if you're living in a world of shoot-ups, then you are going to adapt to that. And there's actually studies showing an habituation in the brain with increased exposure to violent stimuli. Social media, a different set of questions. The need for constant feedback that I just mentioned to when talking about Twitter and so on. I went with my 24-year-old PA on a trip once, and she started taking photos of the breakfast we were having and everything to tell people why this was it. It was only egg and bacon. I don't know why anyone would find this interesting, but the absolute need for constant reassurance. It's as though they're in some kind of existential crisis for doing this. Low empathy. If you don't establish eye contact, if you don't cuddle someone, if you don't lean forward and interpret body language, if you don't interpret voice tone and volume and rate, then you're going to lack the interpersonal skills that are essential for when you meet someone face to face. And it might be very aversive, because body language is nature's way of allowing you or putting the handbrake on for communicating with someone. If that's not there, then you're just going to go off talking about yourself, which human beings like to do, by the way. There's a lovely study of Harvard where the subjects preferred, instead of monetary reward for a task, they preferred to be able to talk about themselves for half an hour. So if ever you've got employees who want a pay rise, you can say instead, talk about yourself, and then we're done, you know. So we know that people like to do that, but normally face-to-face there's a handbrake. There's no handbrake on social media. So where you go, that makes you more vulnerable and brings out extreme ways of people addressing each other because you have to turn up the volume, as it were, in that way, given all the other cues and clues are lacking. A weak sense of identity. Who are you? If you're downloading everything every moment of the day, and you're sharing everything and everything is shared back, where's the firewall of who you are compared to other people? And in the old days, kids in the last century would say, let's make up a game, and you be this and you be that, and you'd develop your own story, your own identity, your own little life story. And if now that is not happening because everything is shared, might you not have some kind of personal crisis and have this rather weak sense of who you may be? And I just wonder, and I just throw this out for discussion, whether the rise of tattoos has anything to do with that. They're a technology that have been around for ages. A tattoo is permanent and it's on you alone. So is that some sign that people are clinging to some kind of permanence in an otherwise shifting world? Just a thought. Okay, finally, search engines are very important for education, but people don't differentiate sufficiently, possibly, between information and knowledge. And clearly, whereas you can get lots of information, that doesn't join up the dots. The whole point of knowledge is to understand, to see one thing in terms of something else. So my little brother, who I used to torture by forcing him to learn Shakespeare when he was very small, there's a line in Macbeth that says, out, brief candle, life is but a poor player that struts a fret. And had you said to him, he was 3 at the time, Graham, what does it mean, out, brief candle? He would have said, well, you have a candle on your birthday cake and you blow it out. He wouldn't have seen it as a metaphor for death. He couldn't see one thing in terms of something else. And that ability to think metaphorically, to see symbols, is not necessarily automatically guaranteed when you go on YouTube or look at the images. And finally, cognitive skills. We know that what we're really putting a premium on is creativity, imagination, and I would challenge the fact that you can just download those things and buy them quickly. In fact, they might be negative in that sense because it could be distracting, and I see my time's up. So I'll end with icons, not ideas. When you read a book, you have ideas. Ideas are abstract concepts, and again, how would you ever have subtle ideas necessarily conveyed automatically and downloaded? So my suggestion, therefore, is of course we need screen technologies, but it should be a means to an end, not an end in itself. And the big question is, what do we want that end to be? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And as I saw, you were just wrapping up there, about 15 people holding up their phones, just like the lady's doing, trying to take a photo of me, concentrating on their screen rather than
Not
you.
throwing their phones away.
No. The revolution has not yet started. Time for questions. I'm sure there are plenty. Can I just start by asking you and myself, what are the answers to some of those questions that you raised? We've had...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, just, say, take either video games that have been around for 20 years or social media. What are the results that academics have found?
Okay, well, this is a shameless plug for a book I wrote in 2014 called Mind Change.
Brilliant. Plug
which
away.
summarises, and needless to say, there's all the references in there. But I think the answers to those questions really is, as I ended, is what do we want? And people know what they don't want, but now I can say what I want, but I don't rule the world, but if I did, what I'd like to see are confident individuals that respect individuality in others, that have a strength of character to face up to the vicissitudes of life, that aren't upset and cowed when bad things happen, but can cope with those things. And I think that comes from playing games, from interacting, and that in turn comes as well from 3 really important things that I think are missing sometimes, which is so sad that one even has to flag them. The first is getting outside and climbing a tree and realising when you fall out the tree you hurt yourself, that actions have consequences. Or if you bash someone, they're going to bash you back. You learn that, and that hurts. Yeah? And we talked this morning about being outside and enhancing cognitive skills when you can smell and touch things as well. So getting out, and of course, minimising the risk of obesity, burning off the calories, that lovely feeling of exercise when you just feel you can cope with things, yeah, which I'm sure, Shiv, you know. That's first thing. Second, eating together. And nowadays, that can't be assumed in the way that it was in previous generations, where you share literally compagnon or copain, where you actually share bread together. And every society has ritualized eating food. So eating together, sitting around a table, no mobiles, and actually looking each other in the eye and chomping away at whatever you're eating, and actually just bonding together over a table. And the final one is reading, especially for young kids that don't have reading skills yet, where you can actually cuddle the kid, which is nice, and bond with the child. And as you read, they develop, really important, an attention span and an imagination. They learn, even though they can't read very well, how to conjure up inside their own little heads these wonderful worlds that no one else can share. And I think that is sad if they're losing that. So it's reading, exercise, and eating together that I would suggest should be right up there with all these other IT-related things. But we need to ask, what do we want? Do we want a load of kind of second-rate machines, or do we want people who are, or do we want people who are like little kids, or do we want people who are confident individuals? In 1964, Isaac Asimov wrote a very prophetic piece, which I don't have time to show now, saying that in 2014, the lucky few who could be involved in creative work of any sort would be the true elite of mankind, that everyone else would merely serve a machine. He wrote that in 1964.
Right, unconfident kids it is, that's what I'm going for. That's my generation of millennials. Yes, over here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, Philippe Perchoc, I work at the European Parliament Research Service. There is one issue that you didn't touch, which is memory. There is this very interesting discussion in Plateau about the fact that with books we don't need memories anymore, but still you have to find a good book. What is the interaction between these screens and the capacity, the memory capacity of people?
I could have mentioned many things, but as you know, I was on a tight time frame of only 5 slides, so just very briefly. There's a work of someone called Sparrow who looked at memory strategies. This was a few years ago with people on the screen, showing that now you don't remember the fact, you remember where you're going to look it up rather than... Now, that may or may not be a good thing, but if you're having an online real-time conversation like I am with you now, you can't have time to go offline and look things up or check things out. You need a working knowledge base, what we would call common knowledge or general knowledge. So if I said to you, I've just come back from Barcelona and you don't know where that is, or I've just been interested in Henry VIII and you don't know who he was, then clearly our conversation is going to be much more limited than otherwise. And it's a bit like when you meet people, you feel closer to people when you have more frames of reference that you say, as in King Lear, and they say, yes, as in... So the more you can have in your head, the better it is for meeting with people. And I think that, as I say, whilst you can look things up, that's not active implementation in your conceptual framework or structure. Whereas if something's internalized, it's one of the dots where you join up other dots, So it's not just an isolated fact, because let's be brutal, facts are pretty boring, which is why I'm sure in this country you have pub quizzes, and trivial pursuits. They're not up there with the Nobel Prize, because however much you know facts on their own are irrelevant. It's how you join up the facts and how you incorporate them into a framework that's really important.
Anyone else? Please put up your hands just so I can see. Okay, we've got a lady at the front. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Sissou. Thank you for your talk, and I'm looking very much forward to reading your book. I agree with what you said, and I did even before you said it.
Sounds like there's a butt coming, Jacqueline.
But what I'd like to know is in terms of ways forward, because I agree social media, I agree with everything you said, and I don't think I'm the only one. But, for example, when you tell your child no video games, and all your otherwise educated friends say no, that's how you keep up with social life. When the school allows the cell phone in the courtyard in college, and when, the teachers give assignments to tell their kids to go into Google, and that it's okay to quote Wikipedia, and your boss sends you information by way of social media, and everything we've said in this conference today is flashed in front of us. How do you resist that as an individual without being weird?
Okay, so there's so many ways I could answer that. One talks about cultural change, and it's a very slippery concept. But I'm old enough to remember when I was growing up, every lady aspired to having a fur coat, because that would mean that your husband, and it was your husband in those days, had actually made it in the world. Now, certainly in the UK, you wouldn't be seen dead wearing a fur coat, because people would harangue you and shout at you and so on. And it's not as if it's against the law to wear a fur coat, but no one does, because the culture has changed, awareness has been raised, people have made their own decisions about what's important and how one should proceed. Now, again, I think the more we can raise awareness about this, then you start bottom up. People will become, the parents will go to their teachers and start saying, look, why are you insisting my kid has an iPad in the class? What's your evidence? And I'm taking that as an example. To the best of my knowledge, no one has done a proper study, where they've taken kids of equal ability and age, split them into two, and for 6 months given one lot iPads and the other one not, and then shown it's beneficial. No one has done that. We all take it as this glamorous article of faith. It's good to have them. Fine, it might be, but if I was a parent, I'd want to see evidence that was the case, especially if you're worried that they're getting overly dependent on them. There's also minor issues like the blue light at night, keeping them awake, and sleep disorders, but and the obesity because they're sedentary, but let's not even go there. So it's not so much all weird. I think that most people, I talk a lot about this subject, and these famous captains of industry often will come up and say, well, I've got a 15-year-old and I'm really worried they're doing this or that. You know, I think one gets cowed a lot sometimes by thinking that it's uncool and old-fashioned or, you know, to actually challenge technology. But I think it's just being civilized and caring about humanity. It's not to say, well, you know, we shouldn't all join the Amish. I hope there's no Amish people here. But more that it should be a means to an end, but we need to know what the end is. And in terms of the kids and peer pressure, my suggestion is to do something that's even better and more exciting. So I had a lovely email from a dad in Melbourne, and he says his kids just wanted to hang around the house all weekend doing technology. He insisted they went out on their bikes. And he said as they were riding up and down this steepish hill on their bikes, they started giggling spontaneously. And he said, that is music to the ears of a parent. I never hear that noise when they're using technology. You know, and it's that kind of regaining of, you know, just of what really matters to us and what's important without sounding too emotional and so on. But I think, yes, it should be a means to an end. Of course it's important, but to have a life as well, not to have this parallel universe where you get up, you go dating, you go shopping, you play games, all without meeting another human being. That can't be right. Can't be.
We've got a few minutes left, and we've got a question just over here.
Hi. Sorry.
Oh, hi.
My name is Mina Hans. I just have a question. So there is, you know, a lot of unknowns in terms of where this all leads to. Just you started off your conversation talking about the connections of the brain and the morphology of the brain. I mean, do you have some insights into if we sort of hurtle along this direction, what happens to the morphology of the brain and sort of projections around what that's going to look like?
Well, there's increasing evidence because people now are able to do scans and look at the connectivity of microstructural abnormalities with excessive internet use. If anyone wants to email me, I've got references, even after 2014. Since then, I've got a particularly good review written by a friend called Eric Sigman that's just come out about this. So, yes, there is evidence about that. But as he urges in his review, we should adopt a more precautionary principle. This is a big experiment. We can't assume it's all going to be okay. And if we are concerned, for example, the American Pediatric Academy says no screens for anyone under 2. None, nothing. Yeah. And yet we see routinely in supermarkets, you know, the parents with the kids being given an iPad. And after the age of 2, 1 hour a day only, you know? And I'm sure there's a lot exceeding that. So people are starting to get worried. And rather than say, well, where's the proof? You know, you can't prove it's doing bad. You prove it's doing good, I would say back. And meanwhile, let's have the default situation rather than doing this terrible experiment with young people's minds.
Okay, maybe time for one last question. Just take that from Joe Kavanagh. Is he in the room? Joe Kavanagh here?
No, it's been disowned, the comment.
No? Yeah, he's written a comment and fled
Was
the
it
room.
rude?
No, it's a disruption the next stage of human... Is this disruption or the next stage of human development?
Okay, so, well, it's up to us. It's in our hands. It's our choice. You know, we're not... You know, the machines haven't taken over. They should be serving us, as Asimov said, rather than we serve a machine. And I should ask you, you know, you're citizens of the 21st century, all of you are leaders in your world, you'll be here. What do you want? Make it happen. As someone said once, you know, we shouldn't just say what's going to happen in the future. We should say, how do we shape the future? And we are so privileged in our Western, civilized, advanced technology. Many people, sadly, in the world can't have those choices because they're too hungry or frightened or in pain or cold or disempowered. We are none of the above. So surely we should be really thinking positively about what we want and how we're going to get there. And until we know what we want, how can we possibly get technology to deliver that?
Last question, the gentleman over there in the back.
Richard Addy, thank you very much for a great talk.
Thank you.
Could you tell us...
Where are you? Sorry, can you wave your hand? Oh, yeah, that's great. Huh?
Could you tell us what actually happens when young people, even older people, get repeatedly the same message? What happens in terms of the brain structure that you presented earlier?
You mean the same message? You mean the same experience over and over again?
The same experience in terms of why does advertising and affect it? Why does it work?
And why do we repeat? And why even a young kids, as the Jesuits said, give me a child until he is 7 and I will give you the man. Yeah?
Exactly.
Okay, so that's something that we've known about in neuroscience for a long time called long-term potentiation. And this is where the connections between brain cells, the more they are exercised and rehearsed, inevitably, a bit like muscle, the stronger they become, the more effective they become, and others that are not so exercised weaken. So it's a bit like a muscle, you use it or you lose it. And the more certain structures, certain connections are exercised, then, which is why it's very hard to undo indoctrination in very young people, because it's all solid there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've run out of time, sadly. Could you give Susan a big round of applause? And thank you for being such a wonderful audience. In half an hour, we've got Yasmin Abdul-Majid, who's speaking next. And so enjoy your break. Thank you. Real pleasure. Thank you, and thank you for your question. What's the time?
Hi.
Hi. Hello.
I'm one of Miriam's friends.
Yes. Sorry, my mic's still on. It's like everyone can hear me. I haven't got round.